The sun had barely risen over the strange world where alien ships had landed. The planet, once a peaceful place, now bore the scars of war. The soil, the sky, and even the air felt heavy, as if the planet itself mourned its fate. In the midst of all this chaos, a human soldier named Eric found himself stranded on the planet's surface. Eric was part of a small team that had crash-landed after their ship was shot down by unknown alien forces. The rest of his team was either dead or missing, and now Eric was alone. His mission was simple: survive and gather as much information about the aliens who controlled this world. He had no idea just how complicated things would become. His first days on the planet were spent hiding in the wilderness, trying to avoid detection. The alien soldiers were everywhere, with advanced weapons and technology far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. But Eric was skilled. He knew how to survive in the toughest of environments. He had faced many dangers before, but nothing prepared him for what he was about to encounter. One evening, while scouting the outskirts of a ruined city, Eric spotted a group of alien soldiers dragging something through the streets. At first, he thought it was just another prisoner, but then he saw her. The alien woman was different. She stood tall, her long silver hair glowing under the dim light of the setting. Her skin was a deep shade of blue with intricate patterns running across her arms and face. She was beautiful in a way that felt unnatural. She was royalty, Eric could tell by the way the soldiers treated her. They weren't dragging her because she was weak. They were dragging her because she was a prize. Eric watched them carefully. Hiding behind a pile of debris, he had heard of this alien species before, were known for their strength and power, but he had never seen one so vulnerable. The woman was shackled, her hands bound tightly in chains, yet her posture remained proud, and there was a fierce fire in her eyes. She was a prisoner, but she didn't look like one. Curiosity gnawed at Eric. He knew it wasn't his place to interfere. His mission was to gather information, not to rescue aliens. But there was something about her, something that made him hesitate. Soldiers eventually brought her to the central square of the city, where she was placed in a large cage. The soldiers stood guard around her, ensuring she couldn't escape. Eric observed from a distance, his heart racing as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. What had this woman done to end up in this cage? And why did she look at him like that? There was something in her gaze that unsettled him. It wasn't hatred, but it wasn't pity either. It was something deeper. Eric couldn't quite place it, but it felt familiar. Over the next few days, Eric couldn't stop thinking about her. Every time he went out to gather supplies or scout the area, he found himself looking back at the cage. He watched as the alien soldiers occasionally brought her food and water, but she never accepted. She turned her face away as if she were too proud to eat their offerings. It wasn't long before Eric found himself standing near the cage, hidden in the shadows of a broken building. The princess he had come to think of her as that was. Sitting on the ground, her eyes closed, her back against the cold bars of the cage. Her long hair cascaded down her back, and for a moment, she looked almost peaceful. But peace didn't last on this world. As the day wore on, the sound of approaching footsteps reached Eric's ears. He turned to look, his heart racing. The alien soldiers were back, and they weren't alone. They were bringing more prisoners with them, humans this time. Eric watched from the shadows, his hands tightening around the rifle he had scavenged. The soldiers shoved the humans into a nearby cage, laughing and shouting in their strange, guttural language. The princess didn't even flinch. She sat there, unmoving, her gaze fixed on the ground. Eric's heart ached for her. She wasn't like the others. There was something different about her. Something that made him want to reach out, to help. But he couldn't, not yet. He had to stay focused. His mission came first. But as the days passed, Eric found it harder and harder to ignore her. The princess had become more than just a prisoner. She had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with this war power, control, and fear. She was a prisoner, but so was he. They were both trapped in this endless cycle of violence. One night, as the moon rose high in the sky, Eric made a decision. He would speak to her. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he couldn't stand idly by anymore. He approached the cage carefully, keeping his movements slow and quiet. When he was close enough, he whispered, "Hey." The princess didn't move at first, as if she hadn't heard him. Then her eyes slowly lifted to meet his. She said nothing, but her gaze was sharp, intense. Eric could feel the weight of it. "I'm not here to hurt you," Eric said softly, trying to sound reassuring. "I just want to help." The princess' lips tightened into a thin line, and for a moment she looked away, as if considering his words. Then she spoke in a voice so quiet that Eric had to strain to hear her. "Don't shame me." Eric froze. I hadn't expected those words. He had thought she would be angry or afraid, but not ashamed. "I'm not trying to shame you," he replied gently, taking a step closer to the bars. "I just want to understand." Looked at him for a long time before finally speaking again, her voice full of quiet strength. "You wouldn't understand." Eric felt something shift in that moment, something deep within him. He had seen the strength in her eyes before, but now he saw the cracks in her armor. The walls she had built to protect herself from the world. From everyone, even from herself. And in that moment, Eric realized that he wasn't the only one trapped. She was too. Eric couldn't stop thinking about the princess. Since their brief conversation by the cage, something had changed. He knew he had only spoken a few words to her, but it felt like a door had opened, even if only a crack. The way she had looked, at him there was something behind her cold exterior. Something that he could see but couldn't quite understand. She wasn't just a prisoner, she was more than that. He was beginning to see it. Days passed, but every moment spent in the camp felt longer than it should. The tension in the air was thick, as if the entire world was on the brink of something terrible. Eric kept to his usual routine, but his thoughts always wandered back to her. The princess. He often found himself walking near the cage, trying not to be noticed. The guards were less cautious about watching him, but he made sure to stay hidden in the shadows, just out of view. He wanted to see her without drawing attention, to understand what was going on inside her mind. One day, while observing the princess, Eric noticed something strange. The usual coldness in her eyes was gone. In its place, there was something softer, almost sad. She sat on the ground with her knees pulled to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around them. Her face was hidden, but Eric could see the slight tremble of her shoulders. For the first time, he saw her in a completely different light. She wasn't invincible. She wasn't untouchable. She was ... human. Eric's heart clenched. He had never imagined that someone so powerful, someone who had been treated like a queen, could feel this way. It was as if the weight of the world had fallen on her. She didn't speak, but Eric could tell she was struggling. Her silence was louder than any words could be. That night, Eric couldn't sleep. His mind was filled with thoughts of her. The princess, who had everything, but was now nothing more than a prisoner. He kept wondering what had broken her, what had made her so distant, so closed off. The next morning he couldn't resist anymore. He needed to talk to her again. Even if it meant taking a risk, he couldn't just stand by and watch. As usual, the guards weren't paying attention to him, were busy with other matters, and Eric slipped past them with ease. He crept up to the cage, careful not to alert anyone. He could see the princess inside, still sitting with her back against the bars. She wasn't crying anymore, but the sadness in her eyes was unmistakable. "Hey," Eric whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. She stiffened at the sound of his voice, but didn't turn around. There was a long pause before she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want?" she asked, her words sharp. But there was an undercurrent of something fragile in them. "I just wanted to see if you were all right," Eric said, stepping a little closer to the cage. His voice was soft, but there was no hiding the concern in it. The princess didn't answer at first. She just stared at the ground, her face hidden by the shadows of her long silver hair. Eric stood there, waiting for her to respond, not sure if she would. Finally, after what felt like forever, she spoke again, her voice quiet but clear. "Why do you care?" Eric was taken aback by the question. It wasn't a challenge. It was more of a genuine inquiry. She sounded tired, as if she had been asking herself the same thing for a long time. "I don't know," Eric admitted. "Maybe. Because I don't think anyone else cares. I think you're more than just a prisoner." The princess turned her head slightly, just enough for Eric to see her eyes. They were filled with a mixture of emotions, anger, fear, sadness, but also relief. It was a look Eric hadn't expected. She didn't say anything, but he could feel the walls inside her beginning to crack. Just a little, she opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. The guards were coming, and they were close. Panic rose in Eric's chest, and he quickly stepped back, hiding behind a nearby crate. The princess quickly wiped her face, making sure no one could see her vulnerability. The guards walked past, not noticing Eric's presence. When they were gone, he let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. His heart was racing, but there was something else in him. Hope. For the first time since he'd arrived on this planet, he felt like there was a chance that something could change. As the days passed, Eric continued to observe the princess from a distance. He could see that she was struggling with something deep inside. She tried to maintain her proud and distant demeanor, but there were moments when that mask slipped. He noticed the way she flinched when one of the guards spoke to her too harshly, or how she would gaze out at the horizon, as if she was remembering something from the past. Eric started to wonder if she even believed in the strength she projected. He had seen her pain. He had seen the way she carried it, as if it was a burden too heavy to bear. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eric saw her again. She was standing by the cage, her hands gripping the bars as she gazed at the sky. For a moment, she seemed at peace, as if the weight of the world had lifted just enough for her to breathe. Eric approached, but this time, he didn't hide. He stepped right up to the cage, standing just a few feet away. "Why don't you talk to me?" he asked quietly. The princess didn't turn to face him. Instead, she simply let out a soft sigh, as if she had no more energy to keep up her defenses. "I don't know how," she said, her voice barely audible. "I've forgotten how to talk to anyone, without fear." The words hit Eric harder than he expected. He had thought she was just cold, just a product of her circumstances. But now he realized that fear had shaped her more than he could have. "Imagined. I won't hurt you," Eric said gently. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Princess didn't answer, but Eric saw something in her eyes, a flicker of hope. It was small, but it was there, and that in itself felt like a victory. Eric couldn't stop thinking about the princess. After their brief conversation by the cage, he found himself drawn to her more than ever. He had never imagined that such a powerful being, someone who commanded the respect and fear of so many, could hide so much pain. But he had seen it in her eyes, seen the cracks in the walls she had built to protect herself. It had been days since they had spoken. But Eric couldn't shake the image of her sitting alone in the cage, staring out at the horizon as if lost in memories. He knew she wasn't just some alien queen locked away by her people. She was human in a way that he could understand. She wasn't just hiding from her captors. She was hiding from herself. The tension in the camp had only grown stronger. The alien forces were preparing for a new offensive, and the soldiers around him were tense. But even with the pressure mounting, Eric's thoughts kept returning to the princess. One night, as the air grew colder and the camp settled into silence, Eric made a decision. He couldn't keep watching from the shadows. He had to do something. Had to speak to her again. He waited until the guards had moved to their posts, then slipped quietly out of his tent. His heart raced as he walked through the darkened camp, every sound around him seeming louder than usual. When he reached the cage, he was surprised to see the princess standing at the bars, staring out into the night. She looked so still, so distant that, for a moment, Eric wasn't sure she even knew he was there. "Hey," he whispered.
Yes.
Stepping closer to the cage, she turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his for the briefest moment. The coldness in her gaze was still there, but there was something different now, something softer. She didn't say anything, but her silence spoke volumes. Eric hesitated, not sure what to say next. He had never been good with words, especially not when it came to matters of the heart. But he couldn't back down now. He couldn't just leave her there to suffer alone. "You don't have to pretend with me," Eric said softly. "I know. You're not what they say you are." The princess didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze back to the dark sky, her expression unreadable. Eric waited, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He wasn't sure what he expected, but he wasn't ready for what she said next. "I'm not strong like they think." "Hey," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never was." Eric blinked, taken aback. For the first time, she was admitting something he had suspected all along. The princess, the proud, powerful alien, wasn't the untouchable warrior everyone believed her to be. She was just a person, like him, trying to survive in a world that demanded more than anyone could give. "I don't know how to let go," she continued, her voice cracking slightly. "I've been hiding for so long. If I show them I'm weak, they'll destroy me." Eric felt his heart ache for her. He could see it now, the weight of all the expectations, all the pressure she had carried for so long. She wasn't just a prisoner of her people. She was a prisoner of her own fears. "You don't have to do this alone," Eric said, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. "You don't have to carry all of this by yourself." The princess looked at him again, her eyes searching his face as if trying to find something in him that would prove his words were true. But she didn't find it. She didn't believe him, not yet. And that was okay. He wasn't expecting her to. "Why do you care?" she asked her, voice almost a challenge. "Why do you want to help me?" Eric took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. He had never been good with feelings. But something about hers, something about this situation had cracked open a part of him that he had buried for so long. "Because I see you," he said simply. "I see the person behind the mask. The one who's afraid, the one who's hurt, and I don't want you to keep carrying that pain alone." There was a long silence as the princess looked away, her face hidden by her silver hair. Eric's heart pounded in his chest, and he wondered if he had said the wrong thing. But then she spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "I don't know how to trust anymore," she admitted. "Everyone I've ever known has betrayed me, used me for their own gain. How can I trust someone like you?" Eric understood. He could feel her fear, her hesitation. He had seen it before in people who had been hurt too many times to count. It wasn't easy to trust again. But he also knew that sometimes it took someone else's belief in you to help you find your way back. "You don't have to trust me right away," Eric said gently. "But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, the princess didn't respond. But when she finally looked at him again, Eric could see the conflict in her eyes. It was a struggle between the woman she had been forced to be and the person she longed to become. He knew that it wasn't going to be easy, but he also knew that she wasn't as alone as she thought. The princess took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling with the weight of her thoughts. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible nod, she spoke. Maybe I can start trusting you," she whispered. Eric smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and that was all they needed, as the night stretched on. Eric stayed by the cage, watching over her as she finally closed her eyes, perhaps for the first time in a long while, without the heavy burden of fear. She wasn't free yet, but at least now, she knew she didn't have to be alone. The days after their conversation felt different. For the first time, Eric didn't feel like he was just a soldier on a mission. He felt like something more. The princess, though still a prisoner in every sense, had become something to him, something real. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but he had grown attached to her. He cared about her more than he ever expected to. The princess, too, had changed. She wasn't as distant as before. The walls that had kept her locked away from the world were starting to crack. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to trust Eric. He noticed it in the way she looked at him. Now there was no anger or fear, just curiosity. She was starting to let him see the person behind the mask. The person she had hidden for so long. It wasn't easy. She was still guarded, still unwilling to let herself be vulnerable. But she was trying, and that was all Eric needed. He could see the effort she was putting in, and he was determined to help her break free from the chains that bound her, not just physically, but emotionally. One evening, as the camp settled into quiet, Eric found himself standing near the cage. Once again, the princess was sitting against the bars, her head bowed as if lost in thought. For a moment he hesitated, unsure whether to approach her. She had always been so closed off before. But this time, he didn't hesitate. He walked right up to her, his footsteps soft on the cold ground. "You're different," Eric said, his voice steady. The princess didn't look up at him right away, but he could see her shoulders tense. She was still unsure, still fighting her own demons. But there was something in her eyes when she finally met his gaze, something that made Eric feel like they were getting closer, even if only a little. "How do you mean?" she asked, her voice still quiet, but softer than before. "You're not the same," Eric said. "I've been watching you. You're starting to let go. You don't have to hide anymore." The princess didn't respond right away. She looked at him, her face a mixture of doubt and disbelief. "I don't know how," she whispered. "I've spent so many years pretending to be strong. If I let go now, what happens to me?" Eric knelt down in front of the cage, lowering his voice, so only she could hear him. "You don't have to pretend to be something you're not. You're already strong, but you're also human. It's okay to feel things. It's okay to be scared." She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Finally, she spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. "What if I don't? Like who I am when I stop pretending?" Eric's heart ached at her words. He understood her fear. He had seen it in people before, people who had been broken down by their circumstances, forced to become someone they weren't just to survive. But he also knew that she wasn't beyond saving. She wasn't beyond healing. "You won't know until you try," Eric said gently. "You won't be alone. I'll be here." The princess stared at him, her expression unreadable. "Ah!" she opened her mouth to say something, but then she paused, as if struggling to find the right words. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared of letting go. Scared of being weak." Eric reached out, his hand resting against the bars of the cage. He wanted to touch her too, offer her some comfort, but he knew that he couldn't yet. She needed to find her own strength, her own way. All he could do was be there for her. "You're not weak," he said firmly. "You're just ... real, and that's more than enough." Princess took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing just a little. For the first time since they had met, Eric saw a glimmer of something in her eyes. It was a spark of hope, just the smallest flicker, but it was there, and that was all he needed to see. For the next few days, the princess was quieter than usual. She seemed lost in thought, and Eric couldn't help but wonder what was going through her mind. It wasn't like her to be so introspective, but something had changed in her. Could feel it in the air around her, like a shift in the wind. She was beginning to face her fears, to question everything she had believed about herself. Eric, too, was starting to change. He couldn't help but be affected by the princess. There was something about her strength, her ability to survive even the darkest of times, that inspired him. She had faced so much, and yet she was still standing. If she could keep going, then maybe he could too. One night, as they sat together by the cage, Eric noticed that the princess was more relaxed than she had been in days. She was still quiet, but there was a calmness to her now, a peace that hadn't been there before. It was small, but it was a start. "You've come a long way," Eric said, his voice soft. "I'm proud of you." The princess didn't look at him right away, but when she did, her eyes were filled with something new. "I'm not there yet," she said, her voice steady but full of uncertainty. "But I'm trying. Eric smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but they were both changing, and that was enough for now. As the days went on, the princess grew stronger. She was still haunted by her past, still afraid of what might happen if she'd truly let go. But she was beginning to trust again. With each passing day, Eric felt himself drawing closer to her. He didn't know what the future held for them, but he did know one thing: he wouldn't give up on her. Not now, not ever. The days on the planet were growing more dangerous, and the tension in the air was palpable. The alien forces, though strong, seemed to be losing their grip on the planet, and the rebellion against them was gaining momentum. But for Eric, the real battle was not outside, the camp, it was within. He could feel the change in the princess. She was no longer the cold, untouchable figure she had once been. She was someone else, now, someone softer, someone real. The walls she had built to protect herself were still there, but they were starting to crumble. And yet, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that she was still hiding something deep inside. He saw it in her eyes when she looked away, or when she pulled herself back into herself, hiding her emotions behind that same mask. She was afraid of what would happen if she let go completely, afraid of what would happen if she trusted someone completely, especially him. Eric understood her fear. He had seen it before in soldiers who had been scarred by war, in people who had been betrayed by those they loved. He knew how hard it was to open up again after you had been hurt, but he also knew that trust couldn't grow in silence. It had to be nurtured, even when it was hard. One evening, after a long day of avoiding the guards and hiding from the chaos around them, Eric found himself sitting by the cage once again. The princess was inside, as always, but tonight she was different. She was staring at the bars, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She didn't even look up when Eric approached, but he could see the tightness in her shoulders. She was holding something back again. "Hey," Eric said softly, his voice cutting through the quiet of the camp. "You okay?" The princess didn't respond right away. She didn't look at him, but she nodded slightly, as if she was trying to convince herself that everything was fine. Eric could see the lie in her body language. She wasn't fine, but he knew better than to push her too hard. He sat down on the ground outside the cage, just a few feet away from her. He wasn't going to force her to talk, but he wasn't going to leave her alone either. "Do you ever feel like you're not the person you used to be?" he asked after a while. The question was simple, but it was something he had been thinking. About 4 days, the princess shifted, looking at him for the first time that night. Her eyes were tired, but there was something else in them, a hint of sadness, a trace of longing. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Damn, I've been pretending for so long. I don't even remember what it feels like to be myself." Eric didn't speak for a moment. He could feel her pain, her confusion. She had been forced to wear a mask for so long that she had forgotten who she was underneath. And now, with everything falling apart around her, she didn't know how to let that mask fall away. "You don't have to pretend anymore," Eric said gently. "You're allowed to be who you are. You don't have to be the perfect soldier or the perfect queen. You're allowed to be ... human." The princess's lips trembled, but she quickly pressed them together, as if afraid of what might come out. Eric could see the struggle inside, the desire to let go, to trust him, and the fear of what that would mean. "I don't know if I can do that," she said, her voice cracking. "What if I'm not strong enough? What if I can't live up to everything they expect from me?" Eric felt a pang in his chest. He understood. She had spent her entire life being told who she had to be, never allowed to be her true self. She had been shaped by the expectations of others, and now she was lost, unable to find her own path. "You don't have to live up to anyone else's expectations," Eric said, his voice firm. "You just have to be yourself. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real." The princess looked at him then, really looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to understand if he meant what he was saying. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence between them. Finally, she spoke again, her voice small but steady. "I don't know how to be real anymore." Eric's heart ached for her. He could see the pain, the uncertainty in her eyes. She had been trapped in this role for so long that she didn't know how to break free, but Eric knew that she could. He knew that she had it in her to reclaim her true self, and he would be there to help her do it. "You'll figure it out," Eric said softly. "It's not going to be easy, but you're not alone. I'll help you, step by step. We'll figure it out together." For the first time in a long while, the princess didn't look away. She didn't hide behind her walls. She let herself be vulnerable just for a moment. "Why?" she asked, her voice full of confusion. "Why do you care so much?" "I'm just a prisoner. I'm not worth this. Eric shook his head, his gaze soft but steady. You're more than just a prisoner, you're a person, and you're worth everything. The princess looked at him for a long time, her heart racing. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond. But in that moment, she didn't need to. She simply reached out, her hand touching the bars of the cage where his hand rested. For a brief moment, her fingers touched just a light, fleeting contact, but it was enough. It was a silent promise, a promise that they would face the future together, no matter how difficult or uncertain it might be. Eric didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to leave her alone, not now, not ever. And for the first time in a long while, the princess believed him. The days passed quickly as Eric and the princess found themselves caught between the escalating conflict and the delicate trust that was beginning to grow between them. Each day brought its own challenges, more patrols, more danger, and more risks to their survival, but it also brought small moments of connection. Eric had spent weeks observing the princess, but now she was starting to observe him as well. She no longer looked at him with the same guarded, distant expression. Instead, there was curiosity in her eyes, a quiet wonder as she tried to understand this human who had stepped into her world, offering help when everyone else had only offered pain. But even as their bond deepened, the princess still wrestled with the fear of being weak. She had been trained to be strong, to lead her people with an iron fist, never showing any sign of vulnerability. For her, letting go of that strength felt like a betrayal. It was something she couldn't yet bring herself to fully embrace. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Eric found the princess sitting alone by the edge of the camp. She was staring into the distance, her face bathed in the fading light. Her posture was stiff, as if she was still carrying the weight of her title, of her responsibilities. She had always seemed so untouchable, so perfect in her role as a leader. But now, Eric could see the cracks in that facade, the uncertainty, the fear of failure. He approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" Eric asked softly, his voice cutting through the quiet. The princess, turned her head, her eyes meeting his. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then she nodded, a single tear escaping from the corner of her eye. She quickly wiped it away, but Eric had already seen it. "It's hard to let go," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can live without that armor, without the strength they expect me to have." Eric crouched down beside her, his gaze gentle. "You don't need that armor anymore. You're not the person they made you to be. You don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to carry the weight of the galaxy on your shoulders." The princess looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something: comfort, understanding, or maybe just the truth. She had been alone for so long, surrounded by people who either feared or worshipped her, but never really saw her. Eric saw her. "I don't know how to be anything else," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've been told what to do, who to be, for so long that I've forgotten who I really am." Eric took a deep breath, his heart aching for her. It's okay to not have all the answers. But you can start by being who you want to be, not who they expect you to be. The princess stared at him, her heart racing. The weight of her past, the expectations of her people, the fear of weakness, it was all too much. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could let it go. "Who am I?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How do I even begin to find myself again?" Eric smiled gently, his eyes soft. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just take one step at a time. Let go of the things that don't belong to you. Any more you've already started. Trust me." For a long time, the princess didn't speak. She simply sat there, staring into the distance, her thoughts a whirlwind. But when she finally looked at Eric again, there was something different in her eyes, something more. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Scared that if I let go, if I trust too much, I'll lose everything." Eric reached out gently, resting his hand on the bars of the cage. "You're not going to lose me. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The princess looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of dishonesty. But all she found was the sincerity in his gaze, the warmth in his voice. For the first time in a long time, she believed him. Her hands gripped the bars of the cage. But this time, she didn't pull away. She didn't hide. She let herself feel what she had been too afraid to feel before hope. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but it was real. "I've never felt this before," she said softly. "I've never allowed myself to feel hope." Eric smiled, his voice low but full of conviction. "Then let's take this one step at a time. We'll figure it out together. You don't have to do it alone." The princess finally let her guard down just a little. She allowed herself to smile. A faint, uncertain smile, but a smile nonetheless. For the first time, she felt like she didn't have to be strong all the time. She didn't have to carry the world on her shoulders. She could be just herself. As the days went on, their connection deepened. They spent more time together, talking, sharing moments of vulnerability that neither of them had ever experienced before. Eric was patient with her, never rushing her, never pushing her too hard. And slowly, the princess began to trust him more and more. One evening, as the camp grew quiet and the stars filled the sky above them, the princess turned to Eric, her face calm and open. "I never thought I could let anyone in, but you've shown me that it's possible." Eric smiled, his heart full. "Yes. You've always been capable of it. You just needed to believe in yourself." The princess reached through the bars of the cage, her fingers brushing lightly against his. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. She had let him in. She had taken the first step, and as they sat there in the quiet night, side by side, Eric knew that the princess was no longer a prisoner. She was free. Free to be herself, free to trust, free to love. And together, they would face whatever came next.